Hello and welcome to Watchworthy. I'm your co-host, Miss Chris D.
And it's your boy, Brother Ash.
And today's episode, we're talking about the documentary film Stan Lee. It's available on Disney Plus, and this is all about the legend behind Marvel Comics, kind of like his biography about his life. This came out in 2023, so it was cool to kind of go back and watch. We know Stan is no longer with us now, but this was such a great documentary to watch about his life. Yeah.
Stan the man, yo.
I mean, just what does Marvel mean to you? Like
everything.
Right. Like everything. We grew up with it.
I wasn't big on, we just covered the wrestling docu-series on Netflix with Mr. McMahon. I wasn't big on that. I didn't really become an anime fan until like after I was 18 for real. Like I dabble with it, but Marvel was my shit. Like I used to like more than Superman and DC and all them other niggas. Like they cool too, but Marvel was my fucking shit.
Yeah.
I love Marvel.
No, I remember like my mom wasn't big on action movies, but she would like see the Marvel movies with us. Like we would actually go as a family and see it.
Yeah, I remember going to see Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man early in the 2000s, like following that whole series, and then the X-Men movies.
Oh my gosh.
And they had the cartoons too. They had
we had that on bootleg. I'm sorry, Stan.
Nah.
We had X-Men 1 on bootleg.
They had the X-Men joint, they had the Amazing Spider-Man joint, then they came out with a new Spider. It was like
we really grew up during that time of just like action-packed 2000s movies. And so it all was based off of these comics, Marvel comics.
I didn't get a lot of comic books though, I would say.
Yeah, I never really got into that,
I loved them though, but I just didn't have.
I'm trying to think. I don't know. I have always kind of like magazines and stuff, but it's really cool that it all just came from one man's imagination. And so, unfortunately, we don't like see an interview with him live in the documentary, but it uses a lot of archival footage, interviews that he's done in the past, audio interviews, some home video. And it also featured this cool like 3D model animation to kind of tell the story along.
Yeah.
So I've been seeing that a lot lately in documentaries like AI or things like that.
Yeah.
If people aren't available for a documentary. So in this case, I think it was really classy. I think it was really good, and it paid his legacy a really great, homage, if you will.
Yeah.
So you're gonna kick it off with who is Stan Lee?
So Stan Lee, right? His name actually isn't Stan Lee this whole time. So for those of y'all that don't know, I was a huge fan and I didn't know that.
Right.
His name is Stanley Martin Lieber. He was born December 28th, 1922 in the great city of New York, in New York City. His family migrated to New York from Eastern Europe, like most people that, was alive during that time.
Right.
Immigrant family, wasn't making a lot of money. This was around the time of the Great Depression. So he was the oldest of two sons, and he always loved to read books and, movies, any type of, form of entertainment back then. Like I remember they showed in one of the 3D models him just listening to I guess a transmitter, like a radio. A radio was big as fuck.
Yes. And I just keep thinking like, dang, 1922 was so long ago. That was like 100 years ago.
So like we took that for granted, having those cartoons and all of those pictures, but he didn't have that. So he had to read books and kind of, let his imagination visualize things for him. So I thought that was dope.
Even the fact that he could go to the movies, like you said, movies must have just been starting out for real, like the black and white
motion pictures, stuff like that. So so like I said, this was during the Great Depression. So unfortunately for most of Stan's life, his dad was kind of in and out of jobs and unemployed for a good amount of time.
Red flag, because I obviously didn't live during the Great Depression, but was there not more we could do? Like, people was in bread lines.
Yeah.
This is when kids had to drop out of school and start working.
And you got to think, like, it's a lot of jobs. And like, people always say technology takes a lot of jobs, but technology also creates jobs too.
Yeah.
So back then, it might not have been a lot of shit for...
Right. His dad was a dress cutter, so that's why he didn't have any work.
Or like you either was working in the factory and then, if that factory closed or whatever, and you couldn't just find work at the other, industrial machine in your town, then it was. I guess it wasn't a lot of options because he didn't get the impression that his dad was lazy, and didn't want to work. It was just his dad was always in and out of jobs. So Stan always vowed as a child, like he would always have a steady job. Like that's that was his goal in life, to make it so that he could always have a job and not have to, go through some of the things he had to go through as a child.
And red flag for me, because that's so sad that as a child you have to think like, I'm never gonna be like my dad who doesn't have a job. I'm gonna be better. Like, already training them at a young age, like you need to get to work. So,
well, I mean, shit, he needed stuff.
Yeah.
You want a nice life, you got to work. Like, ain't no other way around it for real.
Yeah.
So, in 1939, Stanley graduated high school, and he started working as an assistant for Timely Comics, and he was like, just a kid getting a lookout from his uncle. His uncle worked there, so
gotta
that
love
was
nepotism.
that was I fucking love nepotism. I feel like sometimes as Black people, we be guilty when we use nepotism. Like we feel like
guilt.
What I'm saying? Like we shouldn't just give, a job or opportunity to somebody just because they family. But like I'm like, all right, like it's some family I understand. But like we gotta start doing that. I love nepotism.
Yeah.
Now we gotta start, because I know people that but you know what I'm saying?
But yeah, like you said,
it's
it's great when you can put other people on and y'all work together. And
so this is his first job after graduating high school. And he was hired full-time by the editor Joe Simon, and he also worked closely with Jack Kirby. So they asked him to write the real early Captain America comics, because it was like the type of place where they just needed hands on deck.
Right. It was kind of just like, you do this little one over here, and we'll handle the big stories.
As imaginative and creative as Stan was, he was excited. He started actually signing his name as Stan Lee at this point. So I thought that was dope, because it could either be his first name, Stanley, that he's breaking up.
I didn't even realize.
Or it could just be like Lieberg, but Lee is short for Lieberg. And the two, they're spelled differently too, which I didn't know.
That was clever. That was like his own little autograph.
Yeah, it was smooth too. And it just goes like Stan Lee. Like, who the fuck is Stanley Lieber? We don't know Stanley Lieber. Stan Lee.
Wow.
So in 1941, Stan got promoted to editor when Joe and Jack left Timely Comics. A lot of people apparently had left. He was one of the only ones left. So now he was the writer and the editor, which means he had a lot of time to just crank stuff out. So he worked at a very, very fast pace and velocity.
I love that he could just put out, who you gonna ask? Like, nobody's checking your work really but yourself. So
I wonder if the editor will like this. I'm the editor type shit. So he wound up entering the draft though for the war, and he was ultimately hired by the Army to be a playwright, which basically meant he was just rewriting like rule books and information for the Army as comics to make it more understandable, and to like decrease the time it took for the Army to, train officers and stuff.
I forgot to say red flag for having to join the draft for World War II, because that was some treacherous times. But I'm glad that it worked out in his favor, and they didn't actually send him overseas, and he was able to use his talent for good, really.
So by 1947, he had, after the Army, he went back to Timely Comics, wrote some war stories, Roman stories, and humor stories. So now he got right back into the swing of things. He met his wife shortly after, Joan. He got a tip to go to this hat shop to, talk to this girl from somebody, a friend, and he ended up falling in love with the girl at the door instead.
That was hilarious.
It was love at first sight, though.
Red flag.
But he just...
Because you came to see me, but then you fell in love with my coworker.
I don't think that's a red flag. Shit, it's his life.
But I love their love story. It really sounded like love at first sight.
Ain't like he was, dating the girl he went to go see. He went to go scope the scene.
Right.
And he ended up finding who he really wanted to be his wife. So he met his wife, Joan. Joan Lieberg. I love Joan. Mm-hmm. Joan was awesome. She just supported him, and they just got along so well. It just seemed like one of those, perfect love stories. Like, how they said.
Did she have an accent? She was like, well, he just wanted to write stories, and I just let him, and it was a perfect love story.
Yeah,
like,
and Stan Freaky Behind was like, and I like that accent that she had too.
He did say that.
I will say, as a millennial, like I didn't like, my dad remembers the Marvel comics coming out when it was coming out,
right? Because my parents grew up in the 70s.
Yeah, like my dad was a boy when all of this was happening, so I didn't know what the fuck Stan looked like before he had to be like 70 years old. Or 60 years old.
It was so weird, you guys, for me to see at the early stages of this documentary, like
you don't even
young
recognize
pictures of him. I was like, he doesn't even look like himself. I just know him as old Stan. Yeah.
So he would write new comics just to afford stuff for him and his wife. You know, like if they needed something they were saving up for, like he would write a comic for
That's
that.
real. I love
Yeah.
that. He was like, I
So-
could just go use my talent and write a quick story and make some money for us.
I mean, it was working for them, so shit.
Yeah.
So remember, he wanted nothing more than a steady job. So this was like a nice thing for him, but he knew that he was only just getting started.
Yeah.
So he did start to question though, like if what he was writing was what people really, really wanted to see, or was he just kind of writing stuff for kids? And you know, the
Yeah.
older he got, the more that kind of like, you know, kind of sat on his mind a little bit. So like, yeah, because it was like around 1954, and a lot of adults didn't really respect comics.
Red flag.
So he would kind of like play it off, like, and just tell people like, "Yo, I'm a writer. Like, I'm not a comic strip writer." You know what I mean?
Red flag for me, because as an artist, like, I understand people thought graffiti isn't art. People always the critics have their say, and so he had to like hide his true identity as a comic book writer so people wouldn't ask too many questions and look down on him.
Yeah. So people were very judgmental, even now, but definitely back then.
When you say you want to be an artist nowadays, people look at you crazy.
Yeah. So I can't imagine what it might have been like back then. Like,
Yeah.
with people, you know how society is with what a man should do to provide for his family and shit. Like, so DC had just created Justice League, and Jack Kirby had just come back to Timely Comics. So now they got like a lot of competition. You know, some of the comics aren't picking up as much. They got a guy over there called Superman. He can fly, shoot lasers out his eyes.
Yeah.
Like,
And Justice League, come on, man.
The Justice League,
Yeah.
man, they was fucking. They still cool. Like,
Yeah.
well, the movie wasn't great, but yeah, Marvel definitely won the long race with that one.
Yeah.
So Stan and Jack, created the Fantastic Four.
Yes.
So they tied like space, and this was like in an effort to, you know, give them something to put up against the Justice League. So this was around the time everybody was trying to get to space. So you know, the story with Fantastic Four, like the four of them went up in space on some science shit, got hit with some solar thing, and
Got some powers.
they all got powers. So that was cool. So the thing about Stan Lee though and Marvel Comics, they wrote their comics based off of like real shit.
Right.
So they wrote like the Fantastic Four, you know, in New York City. Stan always felt like that's what he was most comfortable writing about because that's where he grew up. That's what he knew. So
why not? Why can't superheroes be in New York City? Now we have the joke like, imagine if you live in New York City, you got to clean up after the Avengers.
And it made people like feel closer to the characters. You know what I mean? So the Fantastic Four was actually the first story that they started receiving fan mail for consistently. So they, you know,
red flag, because nobody was sending fan mail for Captain America.
Well, again, like you got to think like probably not a lot, because who sends fan mail? Like a kid.
You have to be a true
you know what I'm saying?
fan.
Yeah, like a real fan. So
yeah.
if you don't, you know, these comics, you say Captain America to us now, something goes off. These kids, it was just another cartoon in a book. You know what I'm saying? So Fantastic Four was definitely game changer for them. They changed the name of Timely Comics to Marvel, and it was just basically based off the word marvelous. He wanted the name of the comics to be something that really caught the reader's attention. So that's when they got the name Marvel Comics. Stan honestly wanted to quit a few times, but you know, he just always felt that, you know, it was on his heart that since there was so many bad things going on in the world, that, you know, if he could just entertain people for a little bit, he did something good.
And red flag for me, this is a red flag to our audience. Do not ever get discouraged about your passion if it's something that you love. And I'm so glad. Imagine if he quit. Yeah. Imagine if he quit right there and we never got all these other comics.
Stan Lee is so inspirational because you can always hear how genuine he is in interviews and stuff. But with the characters that he makes and like the message that he's trying to drive home, you can always tell how genuine and passionate he is about really trying to change the world for a better place through
Marvel
art
be
and
having
through
some
comics.
messages.
Yeah, yo. So that's, you know, I didn't know as a kid, but that's why I was drawn to Spider-Man, because I felt Spider-Man. You feel me? Like, yeah. So after that, he went on to create the Incredible Hulk, inspired by Jekyll and Hyde. I didn't know that. Also
that
mixed with some
cool.
elements of Frankenstein. So Stan also said, "Don't try to please anybody. Please yourself." And that's when everybody started having fun with making the comics. And that's when Marvel really, really, really started to make a turn, when they started introducing more characters like that. So yeah. In 1963, a woman named Flo joined the team as Stan's secretary. She had nothing but great things to say about Stan. She said he never complained when making all of these comics. When, you know, issues with money or deadlines would come up, he wasn't the type of guy to like be an asshole
He
about
sounded
it.
like a great boss.
Which was so refreshing because I feel like we watch these documentaries about these great people and they be like, yeah, they were actually kind of bitchy. Stan was honestly just, he just proves to show like you can be like a cool, respectable guy,
right,
and still have part in building the empire. So like I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah. The inception of the Marvel method, which was basically a technique in the style that they used to create comics, really started to become a thing because people started to see like how effective the way that they worked was, but it was like really unorthodox for real.
It was. I'm gonna put a red flag because I would have been stressed out in that office. They basically was just like, I have an idea. Okay, I'm gonna draw it. Okay, I'm gonna do this. Okay, it's due in 2 days. I'm like, what? I don't know if I could hang back then.
So
but
at first, you know, Stan was like, this is just how we work. But it became, you know, coined as the Marvel method.
Yeah.
And Stan was just like writing everything. He had Jack by his side. They had a great flow between them as an artist and a writer.
Love that.
And comics were like the perfect blend of images and stories.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? So like they really had a great chemistry when it came to, they would literally just spitball. And Stan would come up.
They say he would be jumping on the desk.
Stan would come up and write something and give it to him, and he would just like draw so many pictures.
Yeah.
And then they would go and put the comic together like that. You know what I mean? So like that, I like that work style just because it works for them. You know what I mean?
Whatever's gonna get us some comics.
Yeah, they were destined to be in those offices in New York City, standing on desk and yelling and shit. So yeah, shout out to the artist Jack Kirby. He did more extravagant drawings.
I loved his drawings.
Yeah. So his
Fantastic
drawings were like, you know, the
pow, like
popping out of the frames and all the different action. And that's what I loved about some of these comic books, because like some of their superpowers were so creative. And I'll give DC credit. DC did have a lot of these heroes, not like Stan Lee just copied and pasted, but you can see similarities between like, and all of my superhero nerds, y'all know what I'm talking about, like between Darkseid and Thanos, and you know what I'm saying? So like, it was that world, you know what I'm saying? Stan was able to make it his own, but like the art was just so crazy.
It was really good.
Cause you got a guy throwing a punch, but like the punch is like 30 feet long because it's Mr. Fantastic and he can stretch. And
because how can you take something flat like a piece of paper, pencil and paper, and make it so dynamic in 3D? That was incredible. How can you draw somebody who has invisibility, you know?
But they also made it like human because Steve Ditko was like more, you know, sharp with the realism.
Oh, his Doctor Strange drawings, so like shadows, so good.
When you would see like, you know, Spider-Man at the office talking to J. Jonah Jameson, he would, you know, do like a portrait of them having a conversation. Then it's like, okay, back to reality.
Yeah.
Next page. Boom, boom, explosion. It was just the perfect.
Yeah, it was great.
It was the perfect, you know.
And I just really admired it because we're talking about, what is it, the 60s now? They're literally using pencil and paper. Like, I was like, oh my God, they're like printing the color onto the page. It's just beautiful artistry. So Stan and Joan, you know, they're bringing in the comics and the money now, so they move to Long Island. It's always like New Yorkers are like, okay, let's get away from the city and move to Long Island.
And go right over to Long Island. Like,
so they had a daughter named Joan Celia. They even talked about how it was so funny they had a Joan Jr. Like, he was like, was it pretentious of us? Maybe, but we loved it. And so they ended up having a second daughter, but Stan did experience loss when they lost their second daughter, Jan, shortly after birth. And so they ended up just spoiling their one daughter rotten. And I love that for her, that they were able to have this kind of lifestyle. Like you said, somebody who grew up in the Great Depression, who went from nothing to now you're bringing in some cool comics. And now you have a little bit of a name for yourself. And so Stan says that he put his wife's qualities into the female characters like Mary Jane. I thought that was awesome to hear him say, like, he admired his wife so much, he, you know, started to write her in the comics. I love that. I'll be asking Brother Ash to sneak me in a little song sometime. And so in an old video interview, Joan said that Stan didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't cheat. He was just genuinely a good husband, a good guy.
Yeah.
Like you said, that was very refreshing. Now, I don't want the Stan haters to come out and start commenting.
Y'all
Somebody
can't.
gonna pull up something old from him.
Y'all can't say nothing to me about Stan Lee. Like nothing. That's my guy.
Oh my gosh. So in the 60s, teens weren't really respected. It seems like a theme here. It just seems like comic books, kids, anything childlike is not respected in the early aughts. And so Stan wanted to do something special for teens. And he really said that he wanted to make them real. Like you said, you know, somebody you can relate to who he said, quote, you know, isn't a guy who doesn't have any problems at all. And so that's when they started to come up with Spider-Man. And so he was like, I really want this to come out. You know, he was really excited about it. But the publisher, Martin Goodman, was like, nah, we're not putting that out. Like, red flag. Like, they really just didn't respect teens.
Shout out to the dickhead that didn't want to put out Spider-Man.
Right.
You fucking idiot. Like
he said, nah, we're not going to do that. Well, of course, Stan said, it's too good not to go out. So he just skipped right on over his boss and he put the character out anyway. He kind of did it like on the low.
That's crazy.
Through like a small comic that they had called Amazing Fantasy. Yeah. So it wasn't like he just, you know, blasted out the first Spider-Man comic. He kind of dropped this character into it.
Because the Amazing Fantasy was getting canceled. That was the last issue.
Yeah, that's what he said. He was like, I just wanted to balls to the wall, do it.
Yep.
And so wouldn't you know it, everybody ate up Spider-Man. Everybody loved it. And Martin was like, yo, Stan, actually make that a series. Yes, I'm glad you changed your mind.
Yeah.
So to follow up their success with Spider-Man, Stan and Jack also created Thor based off the Norse gods. I never knew what Thor was based off of.
Yeah.
That's really cool that he was like inspired, like you said, by culture and
I
different
love how
things.
you know they incorporated mythology in there. They like, you know, we did the scientist, we did the kid at school, we did, you know, a little bit of everything.
And I think he said that, you know, he didn't want to do the Greek gods or the Roman. He said there's so many things that have been done about that. Let's try something different.
Yeah.
So he was very imaginative just throughout his career.